which brings us close to the trajectory of the Roman Republic descending to the Roman Empire with emperors, is the president's claim that all of the United States, every square inch, indeed all of the Milky Way, is an active battlefield because Osama wants to kill us anywhere. And therefore, military jurisdiction, military law can be imposed by this president anytime he says he wants to do it. And all of our rights are at his sufferance. Now, when the British Parliament, after the United States, after American colonies insisted on the repeal of the Stamp Act in 1765, when the British Parliament retorted with the Declaratory Act saying, "We still retain power to regulate you without your representation in any matter whatsoever," that was the spark that led to the revolution. Now, when we have a president that says he can impose military jurisdiction on us at any time, it is time to throw him out of office. He cannot be trusted with the reins of power. The last observation before I yield the microphone is this. It's always said by the president that these things are making us safer. They're making us less safe. Foreign countries now, in particular we know from a report from the British Parliament, are refusing to collaborate with efforts, covert actions against the suspected international terrorists because they can't receive assurances we won't torture the captives. That makes us less safe because we need international cooperation. Moreover, by making it clear that we believe in double standards, we have one rule that applies to our actions: waterboarding, torture, kidnapping, putting people in prison in secret, torturing them abroad without any accountability. That's permitted to us. If somebody else does it, it's a violation, and we then capture them and denounce and imprison them, creating a seething resentment of the United States. That is natural in the human species. One standard for one country, another for anyone else. And that will come back to haunt us. We have created more terrorists with this duplicitous attitude of the rule of law than all of our soldiers, heroic and courageous as they are, have killed. And we are therefore more insecure than we were before this exercise began. Aside from that, however, we do need to remember that the United States was born because we wanted to be different from some other countries. There are certain things we don't do because it's the United States of America, like torture or waterboarding. We don't make a cost-benefit analysis. We don't do it because we're Americans and we're civilized. That's something that we can never forget. We should not mirror, we should not imitate the enemy. That then destroys the whole purpose of our existence and why we are fighting to preserve the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to start by saying I'm very honored to be on a panel with such distinguished constitutional experts and people who have spoken so courageously in behalf of the Constitution. I want to thank the organizers of this event for bringing us together, and thank all of you for being here. I'm going to say something I hadn't prepared to say, but if anyone wants to congratulate themselves on getting 2,000 signatures for impeachment, that's not going to fly. That is not going to fly. We have almost 8 million people living in the city of New York, and 2,000 signatures for impeachment is a pittance. The people have to be mobilized. People have to understand what's at stake. Why do you think Congress started impeachment proceedings against Richard Nixon? It wasn't 2,000 signatures. The American people rose up. Congress was the same cowardly, pusillanimous institution that we have today. They weren't doing anything. John Dean testified, cancer on the presidency, bribes and pardons being offered. Was there a word of impeachment? No. But when the Saturday Night Massacre happened, and Richard Nixon fired the prosecutor who was investigating him, the American people, not the Congress, the American people rose up and said, we are not a banana republic, and we are going to have the rule of law, and you, Congress, have to get off your rear ends and do something. And you want to know something? Congress heard that. And if we're not going to have more than 2,000 signatures, Congress is not going to hear it, which means everybody in this room has to take this message out. Now, why do we have to take this message out? Because our liberties are seriously in jeopardy. This is not just some abstract issue about the Constitution. The Constitution was written to preserve our liberties. And that's what's at stake. No more and no less. And the framers understood, and I want to go back to a little bit of history. Bruce is a much better historian. He goes back to pre-Magna Carta times. I can't get there quite yet, but I'll just go back to the framers' debates on the Constitution. You can read some of that in the book I wrote. They knew there was a 4-year term for a president. They knew there'd be a new president. They said that's not enough to protect our democracy. They knew that presidents, during their term of office, could subvert the Constitution. And that was the great and dangerous offense that they wanted to use to remove presidents who were endangering the country by subverting the Constitution. It wasn't enough to wait for another election. Why do you think we even have the impeachment power? What's it? Some vestigial organ? Maybe it's a dinosaur. They didn't know what they were doing. Obsolete. In Mr. Gonzalez's wonderful word, like the Geneva Convention's obsolete. Wait a minute. It was there to protect our democracy. It has to be used. The power was not given to the states. It wasn't given to the Supreme Court. It was put first in the hands of the House of Representatives because that's closest to the people. Because the framers expected in the end, as Bruce mentioned, the responsibility to be with all of us. All of us, to make sure our institutions of government work. Now, why are our liberties threatened? In what ways? And what are the great and dangerous offenses that this president has committed against the Constitution and the people of the United States? Let's just start with one that got me started on this process. And that goes back to the proceedings, the impeachment proceedings against Richard Nixon. And that is illegal wiretapping. Richard Nixon took the law into his own hands. He decided he was going to wiretap White House staffers and journalists, and he said this was for national security purposes. We've heard that one. That's a very well-known and worn refrain. The House Judiciary Committee, as one of the grounds for his impeachment, said that it was wrong and improper and an impeachable offense to wiretap illegally. It wasn't enough to have Richard Nixon impeached, a vote of impeachment by the House Judiciary Committee, and his resignation rather than face certain impeachment. That wasn't enough. Congress, in 1978, said we have to have a law to make sure that this doesn't happen again. They knew what a president unchecked would do with wiretapping powers. One of the people, by the way, who was wiretapped, Mort Halpern, was working for the Muskie campaign. Now, wasn't that really handy-dandy? In the middle of your campaign for president, Richard Nixon, he could listen in to what Muskie was planning. Handy, right? Very handy. Illegal, unconstitutional, impeachable. We now have a law that grew out of that experience with Richard Nixon. It's called FISA. President Bush says, you know what? I don't have to follow this law. I am commander-in-chief. I am above the law. Well, first of all, he took an oath of office that requires him to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. Take care. Laws are faithfully executed. He has to follow the law, not break the law. There's nothing in the Constitution that says he is above the law. We voted for the impeachment on a bipartisan basis of Richard Nixon because